It's time now for a look at what's been making headlines here in a week in France. A march to honor Quentin Deranque is being held in Lyon. The far-right student activist was beaten to death on February 12th in what the Interior Ministry has described as a lynching following a fight between two groups from opposite political extremes. His killing has shocked the country and raised tensions between the far right and the far left ahead of municipal elections to be held next month. President Emmanuel Macron said there was no place in France for movements that adopt and legitimize violence. Morgan Eyre has more details on the investigation into Quentin Deranque's death.
7 men have been charged in relation to the death of far-right activist Quentin Deranque. 6 are charged with intentional homicide. The other, Jacques-Élie Favreau, an assistant to far-left France Unbowed MP Raphael Arnaud, is charged with complicity. Police are still looking for other suspects. According to Lyon's public prosecutor, some admitted they struck Quentin Deranque and/or other victims. However, they all denied any intention to kill.
These 7 people aged between 20 and 26. One, as you know, is a parliamentary assistant. Some belong to associations and 3 state they have been part of or are close to the far-left movement. The public prosecutor's office has requested that these 7 people be placed in pre-trial detention.
The affair has set off a political firestorm in France. The right and left have traded barbs, blame, and on Wednesday the far-left France Unbowed national headquarters was evacuated following a bomb threat. French President Emmanuel Macron weighed in for the first time, calling for an end to the strife.
Extreme parties must put their own house in order, the far left in this instance, but also the other extremist groups and the far right, who at times justify violent action.
Macron has also called on Italy's Giorgia Meloni to stop commenting on what is happening in other countries. He was referring to remarks made by the far-right Italian Prime Minister, who had said that Quentin's death is a wound for all of Europe. His rebuke comes just before French municipal elections in March and the next presidential election in 2027, in which some polls suggest the far-right National Rally could have its best chance yet at winning the presidency.
For more on this, we can bring in Andrew Smith, a lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Thank you.
So this level of animosity between the far right and the far left, has it always been there in France, or are we seeing something new develop here?
There's always been a history of political violence in France, and Lyon has traditionally been a place where that has often bubbled to the surface. Famously, of course, during the 1920s and 30s, there was a long history of street violence between groups on the far left and the far right, trying to impose and engage in kind of symbolic battles for the streets, often around newspaper sellers or occupying squares and corners and flying various types of flags. So certainly this has a long history. It's gone back, of course, after the formation of the Front National in the 1970s, we saw a lot more violent actions, particularly around the far right. And there has been really an increase in that in the last decade or so, where we've seen a lot more, for example, dissolutions of extreme political groups. Now, I think what we've seen here really is a clash between rival extremist groups. It's a really difficult moment, a dangerous moment. And I think, that reference I made to the 1920s and 30s, I think should frighten us all. And that's why it becomes so important not to create of this a moment which is about political tit for tat, about scoring points, or about politicians trying to, burnish their own image or their party's image or attack others. Instead, it becomes important to reflect on, the wrong steps, the intensification, the radicalization that led to this type of violence, and really to condemn any type of political violence which results in these horrible, horrible results.
Now, the former Prime Minister, Dominique de Villepin, warned that France was in danger of having its own Charlie Kirk moment. That a reference to the high-profile assassination last year of the American ultra-conservative activist. Do you agree with him?
I think there's a real danger here that this becomes a moment of quite dangerous political revisionism as well. We've seen especially those responding on the far right to the murder of this far right activist by accusing anti-fascists of being fascists, accusing those who fight Nazism of being Nazis. At the same time, the radical left, the far left, which has fueled this culture of violence. We've seen people arrested associated with this, being previously accused of things like anti-Semitic attacks. On either side, we have connections to political parties. Of course, we've seen one of the men arrested, had connections to a France Unbowed MP. We've seen the rally being organised in Lyon today, being organised by a staffer with connections to the national rally. What this becomes is a moment when really a young man's death becomes manipulated and used for the benefit of others. Emmanuel Macron criticised, of course, Giorgia Meloni, saying that it's curious how many nationalists who seek to be left alone in their country seek very quickly to involve themselves in others. And that's really the big danger, I think. If we look to Lyon today, the presence of international groups, the presence of far-right groups who are associated with different types of movements shows that this is really a kind of tinderbox situation. And it requires, I think, real assumption of responsibility and a real calling for calm from all political parties. There's a trap here for the left as well. Of course, we look to the more sort of mainstream centre-left, for example, the Socialist Party, and they are in a very difficult situation. They don't want to join in a pylon on the left and create this situation where it becomes associated with the more general left. Neither do they want to support La France Insoumise and its violent action, which they've, its violent rhetoric, which seems to have somehow contributed to this type of action. That's the type of, trap that we see for the far left. And what it needs is an assumption of Republican responsibility. However, there's also a danger that the far right tries to further launder its reputation, further distance itself from the types of groups who it is very happy to see undertake this type of action in the streets, while distancing itself and trying to keep its hands clean. That's a really difficult tightrope, and I think it really strengthens the idea that the Republican centre is what needs to hold against these challenges from the far right, from the far left, and radical political movements of all types.
Now, in an opinion piece that was in the conservative Le Figaro newspaper, it said that since Deranque's death, the political landscape has shifted. So, as you were sort of just discussing there, what sort of impact do you think all of this could have on municipal elections? Because the National Front usually does well in the first round, but then that kind of very French, the cordon sanitaire comes out and groups team up strategically to block them from the second round. But if the far left is now the new pariah, what impact will that have on the upcoming elections?
Well, I think it is a really challenging situation. We can see that already playing out in Lyon. We've seen the centre-right challenger for the mayoralty there, Jean-Michel Aulas, talking about whether or not a portrait of Quentin Deranque should have been hung on the outside of the mayoralty. Of course, the mayor rejected this, and then it became a political battle about left, about right, about that kind of association. And so we can see the ways in which that sort of thing will kind of play out in these mayoral elections in numerous local situations in their own ways right across France. And this will, I think, change the political landscape because it will make it more difficult, certainly across the kind of the broad pluralistic left, for La France Insoumise to find partners to work with others, because more people will see it as being, unacceptable. It will also, I think, in many ways, present a political opportunity for the far right, the Rassemblement National, to try and launder its reputation and to increasingly try and present itself as being part of the political mainstream, positioning itself against the extremes. It's very difficult to see these norms, these bulwarks against extremist political rhetoric being eroded by activists on both sides. And I think what needs to be done is really to try and exclude that type of rhetoric, that type of fueling of this type of tension from political mainstream. I think if we look at this type of attack, we see the footage, the horrible footage, which took place. We see people in hoods and masks carrying out violent attacks in the street. No one can feel that they represent anyone or any movement that they want to be part of, whether they're left, whether they're right. That type of political violence cannot form a part of France's electoral landscape. And I think what we need to see is a real awakening that this is the danger that's represented by people's disengagement with political norms, by the fueling of political anger, by the meddling in France's elections by overseas actors, whether that be looking at all types of, tampering with information, whether it be, disinformation campaigns, whether it be foreign heads of states making comments on political matters. It's a dangerous time.
Right. Thank you very much for your analysis, Andrew, and thank you for joining us on the program. That's Andrew Smith, a lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. France has been experiencing an unprecedented amount of rain. The country's National Weather Service said Wednesday marked a record-breaking streak of 35 days of consecutive rain. And while there might be a lull in the rainfall, on Saturday, 3 departments remain under red flood warnings, the highest level. 9 other departments in western France are under orange alerts. Heavy flooding in the west is expected to last for several more days, with floodwaters spreading along the Loire and Maine rivers. French officials are getting creative to protect the Louvre after facing international embarrassment last October when their crown jewels were stolen in broad daylight. A parliamentary report is suggesting police be let in for free on their days off if they carry their weapon to provide backup if there's a break-in. Camille Knight has the story.
Police could soon get free museum entry, provided they carry their weapons. The aim, laid out by a new parliamentary report on museum security, is to bolster security staff already on site in case of an intrusion, a response to the brazen daylight heist that targeted France's priceless crown jewels. Outside the Louvre, French visitors are divided.
Why not, if they're properly identified by museum staff?
There
was plenty security on the day of the heist. Whether they were armed or not, it didn't make a difference.
This recommendation is modelled on a system introduced 4 years ago on trains. Law enforcement can travel for free if they're carrying their weapons and notify the conductor, a way to avoid losing precious minutes if an assailant needs to be neutralised. Would armed police visiting museums on their days off really have changed the course of the Louvre robbery, though? For now, police unions haven't commented, but one major museum union doesn't think it'll make much of a difference.
The Louvre gets 30,000 visitors a day. Imagine that. So this measure is just a drop in the ocean. We are more in favour of increasing staff rather than implementing a measure we consider fairly unreliable.
Among the other recommendations for museum security, better training for reception and surveillance staff, and strengthened protection against the rise in cyber attacks.